and also be available to watch afterwards. To begin with, there are a few matters of housekeeping. For those attending here in the Moot Hall, I can assure you that a risk assessment including COVID-19 risks has been undertaken for this meeting. I can remind everyone that seating is socially distanced with 2 meters between each seat. Please do not move the chairs. Masks can be removed when you're seated. With the exception of the Democratic Service Officers advising us, would participants, both those joining us online and in the Moot Hall, please mute their microphones unless they are invited to speak. I will announce by name and invite to speak those participants wishing to make representations to the committee members in order of business to be conducted. I will ask each item of business to be presented and ask each member of the committee in turn if they wish to ask a question or comment. At the end of each item of business, the Democratic Service Officer will confirm the outcome of the vote. If we are still underway at 8 o'clock, we may have a break at that point. Introductions now, if I may, starting on my right and working round.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Lewis Barber, Deputy Chairman of Local Plan Committee.
Good evening, everybody. It's Stuart Loveland from Tiptree Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Pat Moore, Byfleet and Mersey Ward.
Good evening, Jeremy Hagan, Stanway Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Luxford Vaughan, Wivenhoe Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Phil Coleman, Marland Ward.
Hello, Councillor Julie Young, Greenstead Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Adam Fox, representing Old Heath, the Hythe and Rowhedge.
Good evening, Jan Mooney, Democratic Services Officer.
Karen, would you as well, please?
Karen Syra, Lead Officer for Planning, Housing and Economic Growth.
Thank you, everybody. Item 2 is substitutions. We are the A team tonight, aren't we? So, yeah, okay, so we're okay. Urgent items, Jan, have we?
No urgent items, Chair.
Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest.
Just as not sure if it is necessary, but just in case, about item number 10, I'm a member of Essex County Council as well, which is the report which we're discussing is from Essex County Council, which is probably a non-pecuniary interest if it is an interest.
Any other interests at all? No. Item 5, general items, have your say.
We're doing have your say with the items. So we have Sir Bob Russell speaking to items 7, 8 and 12, I believe. So there are no others as far as I'm aware.
Thank you very much. And we agree the minutes of the last meeting, item 6, held on the 8th of February 21. That's a correct record. Agreed? Thank you. Item 7 is the local plan update. We invite Councillor Sir Bob Russell to come to the table, and you have 3 minutes. Sir Bob, you know the rules.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm grateful to you and the committee for allowing me to speak on this one. Local plan update. I want to just deal exclusively, if I may, with Middlewick. I did take part in the Zoom hearing, which was an interesting experience, and I felt let down by the fact that, having been of the view that Colchester Borough Council, previous local plan committee, had reduced the government or Ministry of Defence's request for 2,000 to 1,000 dwellings, that as the day proceeded, with some devastating evidence from the Essex Wildlife Trust, Colchester Natural History Society and the Butterfly Trust, that frankly even 1,000 houses at Middlewick did not appear to meet the government's own requirements in terms of biodiversity and what land should and should not be developed. And here we have a unique part of the Essex countryside within the borders of urban Colchester, which by good fortune has not been built on, because for 170 years or whatever, 160 years, it's been a firing range. Otherwise, it are long gone for housing. There's no disputing that. And in these more enlightened times, I would like to think that even this late juncture, it would be possible to say these 1,000 houses are 1,000 houses too many. So I acknowledge that Mr. Jameson Bridgewater, the inspector, has heard the evidence. I understand, partly I believe, because the evidence I gave, that he has been back. I've got competition. I'm used to heckling, so that's okay. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to think that, notwithstanding that we are awaiting the inspector's recommendations, is that even at this late juncture, the Colchester Borough Council Local Plan Committee seeks to revisit the whole allocation of Middlewick, and in the process engage objectively with the Essex Wildlife Trust, who at that inquiry, in answer to a question from Mr. Bridgewater, the inspector, who asked, well, if the army moved away and didn't use it anymore for firing range, what would happen to the land? And the Essex Wildlife Trust representative said, well, we'll take it on. That's what we do. So my plea to the local plan committee tonight, Chairman, is to engage with the Essex Wildlife Trust, with the Colchester Natural History Society, with the Butterfly Trust, and with CAUSE, the Campaign Against Urban Sprawl in Essex, to see if it is possible for a zero allocation for housing at Middlewick, because the evidence given that day convinced me that the inclusion of this site for 1,000 houses is not something that Colchester Borough Council should support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Karen, did you want to come in at any point on those remarks?
Just to probably reiterate what Sir Bob has said, that the inspector did hear all the evidence and representations from Essex Wildlife Trust, the Butterfly Trust, etc. And he will be coming to a decision not only on Middlewick, but on all other site allocations. I think it would be premature to do anything in advance of his report at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir Bob. Open the floor up for comments if anybody wishes to say anything or make any points known. We have Laura with us, do we? Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so I'm going to list the names. But Laura, I presume, will present first. Was it Julie? Lewis? Was it Julie?
Good evening. My name is Laura Chase, and just wanted to provide an update on the local plan. The update report notes that Section 1 of the local plan, prepared jointly with Braintree and Tendring, was adopted by full council on the 1st of February 2021. This adoption allowed the examination to progress for Section 2 of the plan, containing Colchester-specific policies and allocations. Public hearing sessions for Section 2 were held on Zoom and YouTube over a 2-week period in April 2021 and formally closed on the 29th of April. The hearing sessions kept well within the time allotted, given that written representations submitted by the council and others on the inspector's matters, issues, and questions covered issues thoroughly. These are given equal weight to verbal submissions. The inspector focused on ensuring those that wanted to speak at the examination received full hearing. A draft modifications schedule was sent to the inspector, Jameson Bridgewater, following the hearing sessions in mid-May, and these reflected the council's views on modifications the inspector could recommend to the plan on the basis that they were necessary for soundness. This schedule combined a number of sources, including those modifications identified at the point of submission of the local plan in October 2017, an updated schedule from March 2021, and then the council hearing statements and further modifications discussed during the hearing sessions. The two previous modifications schedules are available on the council's website. During the inspector's closing statement for the hearing sessions, he outlined his intention to prevent further delays to the examination process and that he wanted to provide certainty to all, councillor, developers, and the public for the local plan. While the Section 1 examination included an extra stage of consultation on further technical work, the timetable for Section 2 is expected to be more straightforward. It is, however, difficult to assign precise dates at this stage in that some of the actions are down to the inspector. But as has been just mentioned, the inspector will shortly be writing to the council to confirm his views on modifications. And at that point, the council will need to make arrangements for a 6 weeks consultation. This includes ensuring the accompanying required sustainability appraisal and habitats regulation work is in hand, uploading documents to the council's consultation portal, and notifying stakeholders. Following the modifications consultation in the summer, the inspector will issue his report and the plan will be recommended for adoption with a report going to local plan committee and then to full council. Further alterations at this stage are not an option. The plan must either be adopted as modified by the inspector, assuming he finds it sound, or rejected. As a further indication of timescales, we can look at the recent Section 2 examination for tendering district council. They were farther ahead of us in that their hearing sessions were held in late February, early March, with their inspector's letter regarding modifications received on 19th May, which was giving you approximately 3 months from hearing sessions to modifications. The timetable is outlined in the local development scheme, which will be discussed later in tonight's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Councillor Julie Young? No? Councillor Fox?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd just like to thank Sir Bob Russell for taking the time to speak to the committee tonight. I watched the evidence that he and others gave at the inspectorate when they reviewed Section 2 of the local plan in terms of Middlewick ranges, and Councillor Dave Harris and Councillor Lee Scordis both spoke at that stage as well, and there certainly was some compelling evidence from Essex Wildlife Trust and others about the site. I think it's worth just reiterating that when the local plan committee decided to include 1,000 houses at Middlewick ranges, it was precisely to prevent overdevelopment at that site, while other councillors came to the committee and argued that there should not be allocations in their ward and that there should be more allocations at Middlewick, and to pile the houses onto Middlewick instead of in other areas of the borough. And frankly, it was heartening to hear Essex Wildlife Trust say that they would be willing to take on responsibility for Middlewick ranges. And so the onus then is on the landowner. The onus is on the Ministry of Defence to take Middlewick ranges off the table to prevent development there, and to allocate that land for something else, like a local nature reserve. And I think what was telling about all that evidence as well was the impact on the biodiversity of the site, and of course it's all wrapped up in the climate emergency that this council declared, that So many other councils around the country acknowledge that the government acknowledges as well. And the Prime Minister, this week is hosting a meeting of the G7 nations where they are supposed to be talking about climate change. But if his own government is selling off land that is vital in tackling the climate emergency for housing, then what are any of us able to do to prevent it? So I welcome what Sir Bob Russell has said, but for me the onus is back in the corner of the Ministry of Defence to take Middlewick Rangers off the table, because otherwise we're reliant on the inspector taking that site out of the local plan, and those houses having to be allocated, that number of houses having to be allocated somewhere else in the borough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Shall we take a few more and then ask for comments? Yes, okay. So, Councillor Luxford-Vaughan.
Thank you, Chairman. In the briefing, I asked what the relationship was between Section 1 and 2, and should Council not adopt Section 2, what would happen? I don't think I was specific enough, because we talked about the process of the public examination and where we felt the inspector was likely to go with that. So I'm going to simplify it. Is Section 1 and Section 2 like jelly and ice cream? They're nice together, but you can eat them separately, or are they the ingredients for a cake, which you can't eat at all if you haven't put them all together?
Would you like to answer that point first?
I'm not sure which food stuff we're looking at here, but I think that Section 1 was adopted on its own by Braintree, Tendring, and Colchester as a standalone document. They then do set targets for housing and employment, so those do need to then be followed up with further work, but the targets would remain valid. So Section 1 does have validity in its own right, particularly given that it was also adopted by Braintree and Tendring. So I think I'm putting it in the jelly and ice cream category.
Did you have any other points at this stage?
Just to say that we have secured our numbers at 920. However, if we don't allocate additional sites via Section 2, we've got a significant problem. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to just pick up on, I guess, what Councillor Luxford-Vaughan referred to there about the implications if the plan is not found sound, or if there's major modification. For example, a big site was removed, the process that goes on from there. Because so we're saying, just for clarity, Section 1's adopted, and we have the 920 sort of in from Section 1. What would happen if there was, for instance, Section 2 found perhaps unsound? I mean, I'd be surprised if Section 2 was found unsound completely, but if it was, or if there was major changes that required extensive investigation by the committee and the council, what would happen then to our numbers, and where we would be there as a...
Firstly, I think we have a certain amount of confidence that we're not expecting that, in that inspectors are meant to keep councils appraised of their views. Clearly, the Section 1 inspector got back to us with his views, and then we went through that more extensive process, as you're aware, of looking at different options of how to handle the plan. And that was done, there was an interim set of points that he raised with the council. That hasn't happened in this case. The Section 2 inspector did say that he would, wanted to see our list of modifications. He didn't raise any further issues of soundness at that time. So, but meanwhile, obviously, we are anxious to get it adopted, as it provides that extra level of certainty that we want. Certainly, there is issues around changing methodologies, and adopting Section 2 provides that level of certainty, because I think it can be argued that Section 1 is a valid plan on its own, but it does just set the targets. Those targets then need to be followed up on with further plans. So we obviously, the sooner we can achieve that, the better.
Okay, thank you. I think it's okay for now. Thanks.
Did you want to come in at this point, Karen?
Yes, please. Just to add really to what Laura was saying and perhaps try to provide an example of where extra detail is required. And that's in relation to the housing numbers, which Councillor Luxford-Bourne mentioned. The MPPF requires us to demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable sites, and then a 6 to 11 year supply of developable sites. I think I've got that the right way around. And then ideally a supply of sites for years 11 to 15. Those sites are included in section 2. So if section 2 isn't adopted, we can't demonstrate that. And I fear we would be vulnerable then to planning by appeal. So that was just an example of how section 2 adds detail to section 1.
Thank you. I've got 2 more councillors so far. Councillor Coleman's next.
Thank you, Chair. I think, Karen, you went some way to addressing my question. The question is a bit of a spin. What, if anything, would actually trigger the rise from 920 to 1095? Thank you.
If we had to start another plan, it would automatically revert to that higher number.
Okay, now Councillor Julie Young, please.
And just moving on from that, Chair, I think it will only hold good for 5 years anyway, as I understand it. And when is the trigger point for that, Karen? Is it the adoption of section 2 of the local plan? And I wanted, through you, Chair, to ask whether officers have been requested to look for other sites if Middlewick is taken out of section 2.
I've got Councillor Barber next, and then I'll let Karen and Laura come back on all those points. Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. I guess slightly almost linked to Councillor Young's question there, which I probably maybe didn't stress enough in my previous question, is what happens if there is some extensive modifications that are needed, particularly in relation to Middlewick, for example, as that's one of the biggest sites in section 2, probably biggest is off the top of my head, single sort of site in section 2. If we needed to do more work around that to make it sound, or are we saying that he would, I think it was a heating inspector, would literally dictate what our policy would have to be on Middlewick for us to then adopt it? Or could there be a situation whereby this committee would have to be doing some more work around a particular policy due to the inspector's judgment, setting aside what the council may do in the future beyond the inspector's report, but in this period, what would the implications of that be on our housing number? Because with respect, we were told section 1 would be tied up pretty quickly, the timescales, when we received the original letter in June 2018, and it dragged on much longer than we all anticipated. If there was some serious work to be done on section 2, would that have any bearing on our numbers because of that? Not what the council may do itself in future, but from the inspector's judgment, just understanding the process that we may have ahead of us. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, I think I'm wanting to go back to my previous point about the inspector actually having that for the process to work, the inspector does need to raise issues that he's concerned about early on. I think you started to identify, and Karen certainly pointed out, some of the issues around revisiting housing numbers to any great extent. That it does involve, if you're starting to unpick the plan, that involves going back to square one. And I think looking to revisit the housing numbers in a very extensive way would be something that the inspector would want to give us sight of earlier on in the process.
Okay, thanks.
Did you want to add to it at all, Karen?
Probably to go back to Julie's two questions, 5 years from adoption of section 1 as opposed to section 2, and there's been no specific request to look at other sites other than we tend to get at these committees from various people who don't want one particular site or another. There's always alternatives suggested or we're asked to consider, but the plan is submitted as it's submitted, and that's what will be considered.
Thank you. I don't have any other speakers. Councillor Moore.
Yeah, mine is a question about the question of Middlewick. If the inspector doesn't take it out of the plan and either recommends that the housing should be built in such a way as to maximise the amount of land left for nature or public enjoyment, or if he just doesn't take it out of the plan and we would like to do that, at what point can we create, and is it up to does the local plan panel have a say in this, or will it merely go to planning somewhere else? Because I think it would be nice if we did have a say in how this housing was set out. Do we get a chance in due course to create something as desirable as possible at Middlewick, or is it at this point completely taken out of our hands? Because I feel this is something we should discuss and be proactive about the design of that site. Now, can you assure me that we will have a chance to be involved in that?
Well, there certainly is a number of conditions attached to the allocation, as there are with all the allocations. And there's the expectation that there be a master plan prepared for Middlewick, which would come to the local plan committee.
Councillor Fox is next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to reiterate that it sounds to me that without adoption of section 2 of the local plan, the borough would be subject to speculative development and planning by appeal, because we would still have to deliver 920 homes a year, which I suppose some might call the number of houses expected for us to be built. And I know that some people campaigned during the recent local elections that we shouldn't build any more houses than were necessary. And so I assume that's the 920 figure too. But it would be the responsibility of the new administration to ensure that section 2 of the local plan was adopted. I couldn't see the new portfolio holder responsible for the local plan here this evening, but
there's the leadership tonight at the same time.
Oh, okay. I'm sure that they will take notice of the proceedings this evening in any case, but if assuming that a letter comes back from the inspector providing a sound plan with modifications, that would then have to go to full council for a vote to be adopted. Thank you, Chair.
To be honest, I was hoping that letter will have arrived already from the inspector, but we're told it could be in any time now. But we're having to deal with what's before us tonight. And I've got Councillor Hagan next.
Thank you, Chair. This is obviously new to me, and I want to say thank you to everyone that's brought this draft local plan forward. All the hard work that's gone into it so far. It's a wealth of information, and it's going to take some time to read through that and absorb it all. It's just a couple of points I want to just raise this evening. And the first point is, let's be absolutely clear that the Ministry of Defence is selling the land, but it's an opportunity to put housing on it. Let's not be anything but clear. It was the previous administration that decided it was acceptable to put the housing into the local plan on Middlewick. The evidence is there, it's online, everyone can go and have a look at that online. And I'm not going to argue right now about housing numbers because, again, I need the evidence. But one thing I will ask about housing numbers as a second point is the numbers themselves have been thrown about 920, I believe, is the number that we're looking at. And then it's 1095 if it doesn't pass. What's the calculation for that 1095? How have we derived that? What's the evidence to say this is going to happen? And what's the evidence to say that we're actually going to build that? Is that not predetermination? And one other thing that I would raise is during a training session the last couple of weeks, I was made aware that we are going to run out of burial ground space in about 10 years' time. And there is mention of burial ground space in the local plan under the Middlewick section, I believe, is what I've been advised. I haven't read that. I still haven't had a chance to read that. However, the question I do raise is actually, if we're going to run out of burial ground space, does that not mean we have to go back and look at allocations again in the next few years? And actually, we could have built on most of the land that we actually need for future burial ground space. So why has this been missed? Why has the previous administration potentially missed the point that we're actually going to run out of burial ground space in 10 years' time? Thank you.
Karen, I think you were the one who wanted to come back on Councillor Fox's comments as well, please.
Okay, apologies, Councillor Fox, but I think you weren't expecting an answer. No, thank you. In terms of the questions Councillor Hagan just asked, the figures are derived from a nationally set standard methodology. I can send you both the process for calculating the standard methodology, which gives the higher figure, and I can also send you how the 920 was arrived at using a strategic housing market assessment. So it's not something I plan to go into tonight for the benefit of anyone watching. They might turn off because it's quite complicated and quite dry, but I'm happy to share it with the whole committee, and we suggest, if need be, we have a separate session. We did have a briefing on housing numbers and how they were calculated last year, so we can share that information. And in terms of burial plots, you're correct, this is referred to in the Middlewick policy and the explanatory text, but it's also something that officers have been looking into over the past year or two, I would imagine. We've previously had discussions with Penny Steins, who manages the crematorium, and from memory, and Councillor Luxford-Vaughan will correct me if I'm wrong, the Wivenhoe Neighbourhood Plan includes provision for an extension to the burial ground in Wivenhoe. So again, that's something that local neighbourhoods can actually do something about themselves. So we have got that in hand, I think.
Councillor Barber is the last one I've got at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to perhaps reminisce about some of the discussions on Middlewick very quickly, but I think it's worth just drawing a line under the debate on that, because I think we're at a position now where we're waiting for the inspector's response. And clearly there is a new administration, as has been alluded to this evening, and I'm sure they'll have their own view on the matter. But what's been submitted is not the current administration's local plan. That's previous administrations. So we are where we are really, and we have to take a view as it goes forward.
Point of order, Chair. I'm just correcting the misinformation that's being conveyed. It is the authority's local plan as it was adopted by full council, not the previous administration's
Section
local
2
plan.
hasn't been adopted.
Sorry, I'm speaking, Councillor Barber.
Point of order back. section 2 hasn't been adopted.
It is the authority's local plan because it was voted on by full council and adopted by the whole council.
Point of order back, section 2 hasn't been adopted by anyone yet, so.
I think Councillor Young just referred to section 1.
Okay, I was discussing section 2, of course, but yeah. But so section 2 hasn't been adopted either way, however you look at it. So that's going to come up based on what the inspectors will decide, and then I'm sure we'll have a debate going forward. But obviously the votes in the past and the votes in the past, no matter of record, but we are really where we are. So I don't think it's worth other members making a point necessarily, because it went through the process of call for sites as any landowner site does, and it was included on the basis of the council's policy. As with any site, the council didn't have to choose it as a site for allocation. It's no different to any other landowner in that regard. I would say I'm correct on that, isn't it, Karen? There you go, Karen nods. So that, I think that's just always worth remembering, regardless of a landowner's intention. Landowners want to put houses, various landowners want to put houses on their sites, and we as the planning authority make the decision which ones to include as part of our call for sites in the process. I think that's worth remembering sometimes when discussing the landowner issue. Thank you.
Don't think there's any need to come back to any, no, okay. I have no more speakers this evening. This item is merely to note, because obviously it's premature without the inspector's report. So is it duly noted? Yes, noted. Agreed. Okay, thank you. If we move on to item, thank you, Laura. Item 8 is the tendering borders. I'm just going through. And welcome, Shelley, luckily to the table, please. To present the item. So, and I thought, I've only done it this way because I thought Sir Bob Russell might like to hear that presentation before speaking. Okay.
Hello everyone, I'm Shelley Blackaby, I'm Garden Community Planner. This report provides an update on progress with the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community Development Plan Document, or DPD. Adopted Section 1 of the local plan sets out the overarching strategy for future growth. Section 1 includes policies and principles for the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community, and states that no planning consent for development forming part of the garden community will be granted until the DPD has been adopted. CBC's planning policy team are working with officers from Tendring District Council and Essex County Council on a DPD to guide development for the garden community. This DPD will determine the boundary of the garden community and provide details further to the principles in adopted Section 1. The DPD will go through the same formal consultation processes that Sections 1 and 2 of the local plan have done, and must meet the same high standards of soundness. Prior and partners have been appointed to prepare a master plan for the garden community. The master planning work will include an evaluation of the site context and review of the baseline. It will define the vision and consider different options for the garden community. This will be carried out in conjunction with a programme of community engagement. The master planning work and community engagement will inform the DPD. Officers will also ensure the DPD is supported by a comprehensive evidence base. Members were advised in February this year that as the Council's first step in the DPD process, a consultation and engagement strategy was published, and a dedicated consultation and engagement website has been established to provide a central source of information on the garden community. A community liaison group has also recently been established, in which individuals come together to discuss the garden community and will contribute towards emerging proposals. On 20th of May, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government announced that the garden community is one of 14 pilots that have been chosen to work with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government on the National Model Design Code testing programme. The purpose of the National Model Design Code is to provide detailed guidance on production of local design codes and guides, and engagement is an important part of the National Model Design Code. Finally, Essex County Council is considering a planning application for the Link Road, which will connect the A133 and A120. Further information about the Link Road application and the rapid transit system is available on Essex County Council's website. Thank you.
Yes, my apologies, Shelley, because by twisting it round, I'm going to need to ask you to vacate the seat while Sir Bob comes and has his 3 minutes. But I just felt it might be useful for him to hear your presentation. Thank you. Then I'll call you back. Sir Bob, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Chairman. The threat to the Salary Brook Valley goes back more than 6 years. And I had hoped that we'd ensured it would be okay. And I'm sure everything will be all right, but I cannot resist the opportunity just to emphasise the point, because 2 or 3 days ago I had cause to drive to Elmstead Market, and somewhat late in the day, you may feel, that there are signs up there from people who are very concerned about the development on their doorstep, although I have no recollection of them being that upset when the whole process was going along. But that's then, and it's now where we are. Elmstead Market saved the buffer, which is all very well, but saving the buffer between Elmstead Market and the proposed new town or new village could well result in the garden village being moved to the west. And moving it to the west could impact on saving Salary Brook Valley as viewed from Grinstead and Longridge. I'd ask members to look at paragraphs 5.2 and 5.3. 5.2 refers to the development plan document, and that the Borough Council has appointed a garden community planner to work on the development plan document. Good. 5.3 says that the development plan document will determine the boundary of the garden community. Well, provided the boundary, as already understood by Colchester Borough Council, doesn't move to the west, that's all fine. But if pressure comes from tendering to move the boundary to the west, bearing in mind every square foot of land for this new town, new village, is in tendering district, there may well be a temptation for tendering to move the new town, the village, to the west, which could visually impact on the open vistas from Grinstead Estate and Longridge, which this Borough Council has stated categorically must be preserved. I think it was a 1.5 kilometres minimum, so as that those of in Avon Way and Longridge looking east would not see anything on the skyline, because everything would be beyond the skyline, and that the views today would be the views in the future. In paragraph 5.6, halfway through, it says here, a community liaison group has been established in which local individuals come together to discuss the garden community and contribute to emerging proposals. I think that is a brilliant idea, a fantastic concept, and I hope it will not be exclusive just for this development. And going back to Middlewick, I would encourage the local plan committee of Colchester Borough Council to create exactly the same community liaison group for Middlewick, because if it's good enough for this development, and it's an excellent idea, then I would suggest one for Middlewick should also be set up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sir Bob. Shelley, please. Sorry for the musical chairs. The first speaker I have is Councillor Young.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got a number of questions, if I may. Back in the administration prior to the elections, the tendering Colchester Border board had Councillor King as the nominated director and myself as a sort of assistant director, and had the leader of the Conservative group also sitting on that group to make sure that across the political spectrum we were represented at those discussions. Chair, I don't know whether there's any information about what's going to happen going forward, but I'd be grateful if you do have any update on that you can share with me. The other matter I wanted to talk about is the community liaison group, and I'm glad to see the chair of that group is with us this evening to hear the discussions. And I share Sir Bob's concerns about those shouting the loudest about buffers, and Greenstead and Longridge need to have a strong voice too. And I know, that they will have one in the chair of that community liaison group. But we also need to understand whether the governance arrangements have been concluded in terms of joint committees between us and tendering, because the people that sit around the table having these discussions, we have the leader of Tendering District Council, Councillor Stock, who's directly affected by the development, and we've got Councillor Carlo Guglielmi that has his own division that is being affected. And we need to make sure that Colchester has a strong voice at the table as well, and for that voice to be people who are directly affected by this development. So we make sure that it is fair to all. And I support the statements that Sir Bob has made about protecting the view from Greenstead and Longridge, which is, something that they've enjoyed and they should continue to enjoy. And the protection of the country park of Salary Brook needs to be a priority for this authority.
I can tell you in conversations with the leader of the council, they've not finalised, but he is minded to have an opposition significant representation there. So as soon as he provides that, I'll make sure everybody knows. Shelley, do you need to comment on anything else said?
I can comment on Salary Brook. So I'd just like to read out from adopted section 1 and policy SP9, which is tendering Colchester Borders Garden Community. So the very first principle and requirement refers to Salary Brook. I'll read it out. Safeguarding the important green edge to Colchester will be essential, with a new country park provided along the Salary Brook corridor and incorporating Churnwood.
Thank you, that's very clear. The next speaker.
Sorry, Chair, the other questions I specifically asked for was confirmation of whether the governance arrangements have been concluded regarding a joint planning committee to take forward the DPDs? What's been concluded on that? I haven't been updated on that.
Thank you for that, Shelley.
I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that.
Is it something that's not been decided yet, or is it something you can come back with an answer for the committee?
The governance falls within the steering group remit and the member group, so we can only comment on planning matters.
I will endeavour to find the answer for you, for the committee, not just yourself, Julie. I have Councillor Barber next.
Thank you, Chair. My question, which I sort of briefly touched on in the spokes briefing earlier in the week, was in relation to the Link Road application that you referred to. There's been a couple of responses by other statutory authorities on the Link Road. Are you able to, because so I don't think borough members were necessarily informed, and I only picked up on Twitter. So other members here may not be aware of some of the comments that have been raised about the Link Road and some of the risks around the Link Road from a planning perspective. Are you able to go into that at all this evening? Just, I think it's important to be aware from our perspective what the implications may be, because it's so key to the development. Thank you.
I was going to ask Laura Chase to answer any comments on the Link Road this evening.
Yeah. Okay, please come, Laura. Perhaps you could bring a chair with you if you wouldn't mind, rather than having to stand. Distancing, isn't it? Yeah, okay, we'll do the musical chairs again. Thank you, Shelley.
Just while there's that swap over, can I just say I've made a note to find out or ask about governance, and I'll let the committee know when I find anything out.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yes, I've been involved in some of the meetings because the councils have been working very closely with ECC and their consultant, Jacobs, to just make sure that there's integration between work on the garden community and work that's, quite often normally highway schemes are done just within highways, but we are talking to them. So the council did submit a joint response with Tendring District Council to the Link Road application, which is available to view on the ECC website. The response noted that the council had been meeting regularly with Essex County Council to progress a project which was, as we know, mandated by Section 1 of the local plan. The councils recognize the Link Road application has needed to proceed in advance of the master planning of the garden community, and that in this respect, it's difficult to fully assess the significance of certain environmental impacts on all potential future environmental issues. Therefore, it'll be important for the authorities to continue to work together as the scheme evolves. And the councils know that the Highway Authority may wish to consider a degree of flexibility within any relevant planning conditions to allow for any adjustments that might be required in the future. These comments were submitted by a development management officer in line with normal procedure for responding to ECC applications in which Colchester Council is a consultee, and this one was actually located in Tendring District Council, but clearly it involves then affecting Colchester. The deadline for a response was 28th May, which didn't allow for any circulation to a lead member, given that portfolios were only agreed on the 26th of May.
Thank you very much. Councillor Coleman is next.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Shelley for the update. The vision and principles for garden communities are far better than anything we've had before. Lots of development in Mile End, and it's been a bit of a fight and a struggle to get the infrastructure, but we've got it, and there's more to come. Infrastructure first has been like the mantra, the saying that's been a guiding light for garden communities. My concern is that we're getting the £99 million for a road. Is that the only infrastructure that we're getting? because certainly a development that size, and if we're talking infrastructure first, what infrastructure is coming? Is it being talked about? When, how, and who's paying? There's a lot there, I appreciate, but it is a concern that we talk about infrastructure first throughout the last 4 or 5 years. And a link road is probably the only thing that I've heard regarding infrastructure first. So, thanks, Shelley.
Yes, there is a lot of infrastructure that will be required for a development of this scale, not just a link road. And I think the Section 1 local plan policies SP8 and SP9 set out some of the requirements. In terms of where we are now, there's lots of discussions going on, there's lots of engagement activity going on. There's also regular meetings between Colchester Tendering, Essex County Council, and we really are at an early stage with the DPD and the master planning process. At the moment, the master planners are looking at baseline and scoping. They haven't got into the detail of the actual master planning. So there will be more detail on infrastructure later on.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was going to raise a point about the governance arrangements too, and thank you to Karen for agreeing to go back and find out from the new administration about what their plans and intentions are. I note that you said that there was a leadership meeting tonight, Chair, involving the Cabinet, and I know how important many of those meetings are, but this is a public meeting of the Council, and a number of the issues here are relevant. And I would hope that perhaps at a future meeting, either the leader or the new portfolio holder for housing and planning could come to speak to us about how they feel they will take the governance arrangements forwards on this particular project because of its significance to the borough. I wanted to thank you for the report and the presentation, and ask a little bit more about the master planning process and how this committee, as the local plan committee for the borough and the members selected by our residents and by our groups to sit on this committee, could be included as part of the master planning process. I think we would like to be involved at the earliest opportunity in that master planning process, and not for a master plan to arrive at this committee having already been produced and the committee not having been involved in it. So that we can convey, the issues that residents raise with us to be a part of, that whole process. Thank you.
Yes, Shelley, would you like to say that?
Well, like I said, there's a lot of engagement activity that's planned, also some engagement that's already been going on. So that engagement is open to all. Perhaps initially, if I just run through some of that. So in December, we published an engagement strategy. Then in February, an engagement website was launched, and that includes the engagement strategy. The website acts as the main portal for all engagement activity, provides information. People can also submit comments and ideas to that website. In May, an update on engagement activity was published on that engagement website. It gives an overview of all the engagement activity that's programmed to take place over the summer and autumn. There'll be a survey, there'll be workshops. We're in the process of producing a schedule, setting out exactly what will be happening and when. So that will be shared with the Garden Community Members Group and can be shared with the local plan committee too. We held a town and parish council briefing in April, and more of those briefings are expected to take place. And finally, in terms of engagement, we're launching a summer design competition for children in the next few weeks. It's open to children in year 5, moving on to year 6, and they'll be asked to draw, animate, or create a 3D model of what they would like to see as their ideal home neighbourhood, and they'll also be asked to think of 3 things that they would like to see in a future development. So that's an overview of engagement activities. In terms of the local plan committee, I had a look at dates of the local plan committee and the master planning timetable. And a baseline report is expected to be produced June, July time. So that can be presented to the August local plan committee. Then in October, we can report a summary of the engagement activity that's taking place over summer and autumn, and also report to the committee on the master planning vision work that will currently be undertaken at that time. And then in December, we can report on a preferred, well, master plan options.
Yeah, Chair, I wonder whether there might be the opportunity for a specific workshop that involves the members of the local plan committee. And that might be something that we could do jointly with the local plan committee from Tendring District Council too, so that, you know, there's some engagement from both authorities, and that there's then an opportunity for both local plan committees to identify where, you know, there might be similarities that both councils are looking at, and where there might be the differences that come from the two different areas. And, you know, if that requires a formal motion at this meeting to require that, Chair, I'd happily put that forward, but I'd hope that that could be arranged for us.
Shelley, can I ask first, our schedule versus tendering schedule? Do you think that's possible to arrange a date like that? Because if so, I can see merit in it, and I'm sure all members would benefit from it. So if necessary, even though this is purely for information tonight, we could ask for that to be organised. What do you think?
I can talk to colleagues at Tendring District Council about that, and also talk to the communications manager for the garden community who works across the local authorities.
Right, can I then pick up on what Councillor Fox has said, and I'll second that, and I'll put it to the committee in a minute, that we do request a joint meeting with Tendring for the local plan committees to discuss this further. Do I have agreement from all the committee? Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you. Leave that with you, Shelley. Thank you very much. And I have Councillor Moore next.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Fox has twice mentioned the absence of the portfolio holder tonight. Is he suggesting that the portfolio holder would have information to give us that the officers do not, or is he merely trying to score a point? It's quite possible that that he didn't receive a notification of this meeting any more than I did, or a link to the agenda. I was hoping that in future this wouldn't happen. I actually had to hunt quite hard to find the necessary documents, and I do hope that this won't happen in the future. Thank you.
I just intercede at this point. Councillor Fox and others have asked specific questions. Where is certain information, and what is this administration going to do? There are significant parts to the meeting tonight that will address those very points. Therefore, they were not available to come tonight, but they've expressed that they wish to be in future. So that's the answer I have.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wasn't making a point just for political point scoring. I was making the point because every other local plan committee I've attended, usually the portfolio holder has been here. And there's a new administration, and the new administration might have some new plans for the local plan process. And I know that the new portfolio holder was very keen to, you know, the local plan committee was fully engaged in these issues when he previously sat on the local plan committee. And I look forward to working with the new portfolio holder for housing and planning. He and I have had discussions already about working together and how we can, work together both on the planning side, but also on the housing side, as was the previous portfolio holder, and I am now shadowing that portfolio too. Thank you.
I can confirm he's very keen to be at future meetings, but tonight there are some significant other points that I'm sure you will then want to hear in due course. Thank you. I have no other speakers on this item. Sorry, Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a lot of questions, so hopefully some of them have been taken off by other members. The first is a list of outstanding information that it would be helpful to have. The first being an example of a DPD, because I've heard the term a lot of times, but I've never studied one in detail. So one of a comparable development would be really helpful, so we know what we're looking to achieve. The other one is a question about whether or not we are going to be setting up a development corporation, which was part of the viability modelling, that it was a kind of an essential way of securing land value uplift. So can we have confirmation one way or the other if that is still going ahead? You mentioned the Government National Model Design Code. It'd be lovely to see a copy of the briefing document, please. You also, at the briefing, said you'd be able to confirm who Mersey Homes are partnering with. That's quite significant in terms of, well, for me, in terms of the viability, because at hearing they said they simply didn't have the capacity to buy the land up front en bloc, and obviously that partner will ensure that that can happen and it can move forward in the nature that we wanted it to. I've got, hang on, I'll just cross off what I've said. Does anyone want to come? That's just a list of stuff I'd like. Does anyone want to come back on that before I finish the questions?
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Shelley and Karen if they want to come back on those points thus far and give you an opportunity to carry on in a minute.
Thank you.
Yes, so the first point, yes, we will provide you with a copy of a DPD, a sort of a comparable document. I think we've got one or two that we can send the committee. Development Corporation, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. And I think, like Karen said about the governance, it's probably one for the steering group rather than a question for me. The National Model Design Code, yes, we can send you a copy of that and the guidance that goes with that. And finally, Mersey Homes, we don't know yet who they're partnering with. They haven't informed us.
Thank you. Something else, there was sort of a list of things that I'd like, is a copy of the brief that we've sent to Priors and Partners. I think that's the correct name. I mean, obviously, you know, we've got a wealth of evidence base that they can be looking to for reference, but presumably they're not going to read through that quantity of documentation. And some of it is now out of date. Is there a written brief that was sent to them to explain their program, their work program, and also what they're being asked to do? And related to that, Councillor Barber mentioned the link road. We've also talked a lot about master planning. I was under the understanding that the MPPF, when it was receiving, in order to make decisions, when you put an application of this type in, it had to be accompanied by a master plan. Now, the master plan that Essex County Council has referred to was the one too out of date, in my opinion anyway. I think it was the 2017 David Locke plan, which it'd be interesting to show of hands how many people actually rejected that plan out of hand. It not only was it massively unpopular, it also doesn't work anymore because it involved a completely different route for the road and a completely different route to the RTS. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think the planning application even complies with national policy. I'm also disappointed that our submission didn't mention the fact that it doesn't comply with the Essex Climate Action Commission reports, nor does it comply with tendering and CBC's climate emergencies. I could list about 12 policies where I don't think it complies, and the really worrying stuff is mostly to do with environment and mitigation. So, can I just put it on the record? I'm very disappointed that those issues weren't raised in our submission to that. And can I ask, and I did ask Karen, maybe you've got that information now, did a councillor sign off that submission? If not, could you explain the procedure around, when councillors are asked to sign things off and not sign things off? And the last thing is just concerning community engagement. Although, you've read from an impressive list the ways in which we want to engage the community. I think it's quite clear from the comments made by Sir Bob tonight and Councillor Young that what local surrounding communities are desperate to hear is that it is going to comply with the principles of garden communities, that it will not coalesce with any other community. And, just because they're not part of this borough, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking also about Ardley, Elmstead. I mean, it's sort of curtains for Cocklesford Heath, but equally, I'm a ward councillor for Wivenhoe. We have been screaming from the rooftops for 6 years that we want a buffer zone. I think in order to take the community with you, something like setting buffers at this very early stage will help relax people into being able to work more closely about how we can put all the nice bits in and make it work. But I think at the moment, I think that issue, and I would suggest that that's the first job that Priors and Partners do, that they actually block those areas in and tell us how those buffers will be secured in legal terms. Not just we're not going to build on them in this plan period, because obviously it extends for the next 40 years, this plan. And I think people would like to see, as mentioned, country parks, but maybe there's other preservations that we can put on them to make that work. So I just, my general feedback from residents in ward is that the engagement isn't working yet. And that's not to say that your intentions aren't good or that won't happen at some stage, but I'm very keen that we as a group are involved as councillors. But I also think now the community liaison group has been set up, it's very set in the number of people involved in it. I'd love to know, for instance, how many people from a tendering postcode have been included in it. But I think it would be great if we could start sharing the work that they're doing, not just with this council, but also the public at large. So I know it's early days and they've only just set up their terms of reference, but I think, some sort of regular report, either at these meetings or, whenever they have meetings, would be reassuring to know where they're up to in that. And then other members of the public could then feed in via the website that's been set up.
Thank you. Shelley and Karen have got a encyclopedia of questions to answer there. So I'm going to let them pick each one's whichever they want to pick to answer first. Shelley?
Well, I think I'll ask Laura Chase again to come and comment on the link road. So if I run through the other questions first. And the brief, Prior and Partners, yes, we can send that to the committee. And engagement, well, I'll talk about buffer zones actually, that was my first note. So I'm going to read again from the adopted section 1 local plan, which the DPD has to comply with, and policy SP9. Principle number 18 says landscape buffers between the site and existing development in Colchester, Wivenhoe and Elmstead Market. So it's in policy that those buffers will be provided. The community liaison group, I believe they've only met twice. And as you said, I think at their recent meeting, they agreed their terms of reference. And I believe the information from that group will be available on the engagement website. I take your point that residents maybe don't feel engaged yet. I think at this stage, the engagement has been about informing people and asking people to submit comments and ideas. What's planned for this summer and autumn is a lot of engagement activity, focus things like surveys and workshops. And like I said, the detailed program for that, exactly what's happening and when, is being finalised at the moment. So we will be able to share that with you shortly to then be able to share with your residents.
Karen?
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of points, and might avoid Laura needing to come up again. I think she mentioned in her presentation that the comments on the link road were required by the 28th of May, bearing in mind the portfolio holders were only determined on the 26th. It didn't give us a great deal of time. I also believe that the scheme of delegation allows officers to deal with applications where we are a consultee because of the often very short timescales we have in which to determine or to comment on those applications. The comments are noted, and we did put in the consultation response about continued working and raised some of the particular areas where we wanted to see more detail in due course. I think there was one other. And the suggestion of regular reports to this committee, I think that's a good one. So happy to take that on board. And I think we spoke before about maybe trying to have a particular subject at each meeting as well as a general update. So we'll build that in going forward.
Sounds good. I have last speaker, Councillor Barber, and then we'll tie it up.
Thank you. Karen, hopefully you'll be able to answer this. It's just on the Link Road issue again. I was just reading, trying to pick up on the county's planning website, some of the responses on it, particularly Highways England's response, which sets the date on not recommending for approval before a certain date. I think it's mid-June that they recommend something along those lines. How does that impact us from a planning perspective if the link road is delayed considerably? Because obviously this is a key piece of infrastructure that, well, it's argued it's a key piece of infrastructure for the housing in the area. I'm just worried, particularly when we've discussed timeframes on showing developments earlier in the meeting, what could be the implications if we see delays with the link road for whatever reason? That would be, I guess, one of my main concerns, and if we have any proviso at present for that. I know it's a relatively recent consultation response and no decisions being made, etc., but I was just wondering generally what would happen, if possible. Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you. I haven't seen the Highways England response, but it sounds like one of their holding responses to applications, which happens quite a lot while they're reviewing the evidence. Given that they've been involved in this from the outset and that there's central government funding for the link road, it would seem somewhat bizarre if there was an objection at this stage which fundamentally held up delivery of that link road.
But nonetheless, if it was delayed for whatever reason, how are you able to just maybe, or is it too big of a topic depending on what kind of happens to the link road? I'm just worried that it's a complicated large project, and complicated large projects in the public sector occasionally go over budget and occasionally take longer to do than one would anticipate. So just in case, or is that too many unknowns at present to be able to discuss that? I always like Plan Bs. It's been my sort of running theme throughout the whole thing. I just want to check the thoughts on that. Thank you.
As it's a Highway Authority, Essex County Council project, then I think they would probably be better placed to answer those questions than I would, but I'm sure they have a plan B.
Right, committee, we're required to note this report, but obviously we need to add the points that have been made note of by Karen and others, that they will deliver the information that we've requested in the future. Is that duly noted? Yes? Okay. So we now on to item 9. Thank you, Shelley. Sorry. This is the Bethany Jones. This is the local development scheme. And I think Bethany's with us on Zoom, I think.
Yes, I am. Can you all hear me and see me?
Yes, please present the item, please.
Perfect, thank you. So good evening, everybody. So members may recall that we regularly review and update the local development scheme known as the LDS. Most recently, this was in February 2019. The LDS sets out the timetable for preparing and adopting the suite of planning documents which will help guide development in Colchester. This includes details of further consultation periods and expected dates of adoption and publication. We need to update the LDS to reflect further consultation and timetable variations for the local plan and the strategic development DPD for the tendering Colchester Borders Garden community, which we've heard about already this evening, as well as the addition of new supplementary planning documents to be produced following adoption of the local plan, section 2. These SPDs will cover the following topics: planning obligations, affordable housing, self and custom build and specialist housing, climate change and biodiversity. These timetables are shown in the chart on page 6 of the LDS, which is attached to the committee report. We've also updated the position of various neighbourhood plans which are being progressed across the borough. The committee are asked to agree these updates to the local development scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, members? Whoa. Oh, Councillor Fox.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wouldn't want it to go by without another question. If my memory is correct, I believe that at the annual meeting of the council, the new leader of the council indicated that the new administration would be looking to provide resources in order for more neighbourhood planning to be able to take place. And I know this is something that Councillor Barber has championed in the past, particularly in urban areas where there is no parish council. And we know how well parish councils have taken forward neighbourhood plans in the past. And I just wondered whether, through you, Chair, you know, or officers know whether any resources have yet been allocated or a programme of work begun to look at how future neighbourhood plans could be taken forward in those areas where they are yet to do so.
There's a lot of expectations 2 weeks in.
Oh, sorry, yes. It's over a month since the local elections.
Yeah, yes, the leader has already expressed his keenness on those and others. And let's just say it's well and truly on the agenda, and they've already met about these things and continue to meet to expand things yet further. And as soon as he's ready to make any announcements, he will do. And then I'll know when you know. Okay. Councillor Coleman?
Thanks, Bethany, for the report. In section 5.6 and 5.8, it says the Essex Green Infrastructure Standards Guidance. Am I reading that in a way which the council, us, would be better than that Essex standard? We could be better in delivering that green infrastructure. Is it down to us as a council to improve or go by that guidance?
You're ahead of yourself, Phil. That's the next item.
It's been a long day, teaching about 1,700 kids all day.
You're forgiven. So, yeah, okay.
Can I ask a quick question of Karen? Is that okay? Thank you, Karen. On just a legal, how the statutory provisions work, for neighbourhood plans, do they need to be kept reviewed in the same way that local plans do? So, for example, obviously one day the local plan will be reviewed, would, for example, West Burgoyne and 8 Ash Green then have to go through the same process again? How does the current law work for neighbour plans? Thank you.
I don't believe there's the sort of 5-year requirement to review a neighbourhood plan like there is a local plan. What parishes may find is that as local plans advance, it becomes necessary to update the neighbourhood plan. The first two that were adopted in Colchester, Boxted and Mile End, Boxted have shown, as far as I'm aware, no intention to update their neighbourhood plan, but Mile End have commenced work. Mile End didn't provide any allocations in their neighbourhood plan, so whether they will this time around, I'm not sure, but I think it's just one to keep under review, really, going forward for all those that have already commenced or adopted neighbourhood plans.
Thank you. I'm just very excited. Councillor Fox is very excited. That's really good. Very passionate about neighbourhood plans, so it's good stuff.
3.1 on page 25, councillors required under the Localism Act of 2011 and the Town and Country Planning Act Regulations 2012 to publish up-to-date information for and preparation of revisions of development plan documents. We are here to agree these changes. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I've just kind of looked through the list, and as far as I can see, you know, these are all parished areas, and I wondered if officers could give a little bit of guidance about how the urban areas might move forward in terms of creating their own neighbourhood plan.
Karen?
Yep, there has to be a qualifying body established, which from memory, 21 people sounds a lot, but from memory, that's how many. Perhaps I could send an email with the details, because it's a long time since anyone other than a parish showed any interest in producing a neighbourhood plan. So it would be good for us as well as yourselves to refresh our knowledge on that.
Apart from Mersey Town Council, of course. Councillor Hay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just actually another question on the local neighbourhood plans. I note that Messing and Stanway are noted here as work abandoned, no active NHP group currently. What support does the council offer those areas perhaps where there was interest in starting one, some work was done, abandoned for some reason? Is there any support mechanism in place to maybe go back and say, look guys, you know, you just need to do this, and perhaps you could get a plan together? And secondly, if that was the case, where we've got expected adoption dates under point 4, if they did go back and say, yeah, we're gonna start the process and get this running, will that be, I guess allowed is a word that we can use, allowed to include those new neighbourhood plans that might be adopted maybe 25, 26 if the work was to resume and get signed off?
Yep, sure. Each neighbourhood plan area has a dedicated officer, but at the end of the day, it is the community's plan. We don't write the plan for the community, and anyone who's been involved in producing a neighbourhood plan will appreciate just how much work is involved in that. And the fact that 2 have been abandoned doesn't completely surprise me, There's also funding obstacles to go through. The first two, I mentioned Boxted and Myland, were awarded £20,000 to help produce the neighbourhood plans, whereas that's not available now. So they're really doing the work on their own, and I can't recall Andrea's involvement in Wivenhoe neighbourhood plan.
It is our plan. We didn't get 20 grand. Can we get a refund, please? I think we got about 2, didn't we?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's, you know, it's really difficult for parishes, but if anyone of them want to resume work or to start a new neighbourhood plan, we will offer support.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really? Right. Okay, we are required to agree the changes. Do we agree? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bethany, from a distance. Right, item 10 is next. Let's try and find it. And we have Catherine Bailey in the house. This is the Essex Green Infrastructure Standards Guidance. And Catherine's going to present it for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Catherine Bailey, Planning Policy Officer. This report provides information on the proposed Essex-wide green infrastructure standards, which are being produced by Essex County Council and are currently being consulted on. And this consultation ends on July the 1st. The Essex Green Infrastructure Standards Guidance has been developed to support policy and decision-making in planning and delivery of multifunctional green infrastructure for placemaking and placekeeping. It is designed to help secure green infrastructure as part of new development, as well as providing support for retrofitting green infrastructure to existing neighbourhoods. It encourages the view of green infrastructure as critical infrastructure. The Essex Standards document has been developed as one of the pilots for a national framework of green infrastructure standards identified in the government's 25-year environment plan. And Natural England has been working with DEFRA and others to design the framework. Essex County Council has developed and adapted this framework to the Essex context through a series of workshops and has identified a set of principles and standards. And these principles and standards for green infrastructure are included in the report. Colchester Borough Council welcomes the creation of this set of principles and standards for green infrastructure. The council recognises that the evidence has increased that green infrastructure can mitigate climate change, poor air quality and nature recovery since the existing Colchester Borough Council Green Infrastructure Strategy was written, alongside a change in the policy context at both the national and local level. The council will therefore seek to update the existing green infrastructure strategy to take account of these changes at an appropriate time. And we'll continue to seek to set local quantity, accessibility and quality standards for green space and green infrastructure where applicable, and to identify its own strategies and framework for delivery at a local level.
Thank you very much. What we are required to do, there's no decision required today. This is for us to prompt discussion and inform the response to be sent to ECC. So based on that, I ask if anybody has, Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I think it's wonderful that we are travelling this route. I am concerned, though, that there's a tension between our intentions to green everything as much as possible, which is excellent, And yet we get more and more cases of insurance companies demanding that trees be cut down because they might just possibly be causing a bit of damage to a house about 5 houses away. I've had a case on Mersey and other cases that I know of. How are we able, or will we be able, to put pressure on to stop this, to help prevent this sort of wanton chopping down of trees because they might just be in the way or a nuisance? Because established trees are probably the best and greenest thing that we've got, and yet they are very vulnerable because we are building closer and closer together. And although when somebody builds, they have to not damage a root, there is no protection for that tree if in future an insurance company says, oh, that root's caused some subsidence, which may or may not be true, but it's much easier often for a householder to save the hassle and cut it down. I tried to get a TPO on a tree in our garden, and I was told, oh no, you don't take one out. You don't take one out on your own tree. I think there's a certain amount of confused thinking going on about the protection of our existing tree and green infrastructure. And that needs to be written into it as well. It's not just about putting trees in patches of ground, in public places. It's about street trees, which are very vulnerable to people wanting to knock them over for assorted reasons, and for garden trees as well. Is there any way that we can build that into this proposal, policy?
Just in relation to new development, to say that we do have controls through the development management system. So we have both an arboriculture and a landscape officer who sit in the development management team. So as the proposals come through the system, and usually there is a landscape condition attached with most major developments, then those officers can identify which trees are suitable for the locations that have been identified. In fact, the landscape officer will, at the master plan stage, identify the suitable places for suitable trees, and can make sure that the right trees are placed in the right location.
Yeah, but this is talking about new trees. Is there any way of protecting existing trees in the policy?
Two things, I guess. First one is that trees can be nominated for a tree preservation order, and each one will be assessed. And existing trees, which are already protected, have to be justified when someone is seeking their removal. And I agree with you, there seems to have been a few of late. I'm not aware of more than a few, but even a few is too many really, where issues of subsidence have been raised as a reason to remove a tree. And if that is the application that's made, then it has to be justified by appropriate evidence, which is then assessed before a decision is taken. And along with most other planning decisions, it's a matter of balance, whether you consider the tree or the house and the structural safety of the house to be more important in cases such as subsidence. So each one is carefully considered on its merits. They're not removed unless there is evidence to justify it.
Oh heck, I can't resist as a pet subject of mine. I got informed today that we're losing 2 more oaks on High Woods, and it's because blatantly houses are built too close to existing trees, and that has always been the case and still is the case. I won't apologise for saying it. Sadly, we've lost a good number of oaks on highways, protected oaks too, but nonetheless oaks, because they're deemed to have been the reason for subsidence. I think but then of course it requires national planning changes to increase distances away, and also about protecting existing trees, because replacing them with saplings takes 100, 200 years to get anywhere near where the current trees are. So they benefit the environment greatly, and we shouldn't be just ripping them out for the sake of it. Sorry, that's me off my soapbox tonight. I've got Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. So if I understand this correctly, and I'm be grateful for your advice about this, this looks like good news in terms of it will give us a bit more of a leeway and lever to turn down applications. So I think we can all think of examples where applications have been refused, such as the Cowdrey site, which was accommodation that was built on a floodplain, for example, that was overturned by an inspector, a government inspector, on appeal. And I think, you know, the building that was very close to the culvert of Sullery Brook, which has, you know, unsettled that area as well, presumably, and, you know, perhaps you could advise me, having this in place will actually give us tools that the planning committee can use in terms of turning applications down. Is that the case?
The principles and standards are guidance at the moment, so they are what they say on the tin, and part of the consultation is asking, do people want to have them as standards that can be assessed and monitored? So that is part of what Essex is asking respondents to reply to. They're quite high level, kind of visionary standards. So I would say we need to keep in place our own local standards as well, and captured in the strategy. So I would hope that we can incorporate the standards in a review of our local strategy.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you very much for the report and alerting the committee to this consultation. I wondered if there's anything in the Essex standards that are being set out that are contradictory to to our own local standards here in Colchester, or whether you know, they fit very closely together. These are obviously newer, but you say they are higher level, and that at some stage we'll want to review our own standards. And I'm just interested in sort of the interface between what might be some high level standards at a county-wide level, but something potentially more specific for us here in Colchester.
Yes, they are high standard, at a higher level standard, if that's the right way of putting it. So they don't go into specifics, they're quite generic across the 9 principles. And that is why I think it is important that we don't set aside our local strategy and guidance purely and take on purely the Essex ones if that moment arises, because our own strategy can drill down right down to local needs and requirements, both of local people, but also in terms of local biodiversity. So.
If any of our standards are higher than counties, can we not cherry pick and pick the highest standards that they have or we have, depending on the subject?
My understanding is that they are recommendations, so I don't believe that they'll be able to enforce their standards upon us. They're taking the standards to the Essex Planning Officers Association towards the end of the year. I think they're going to have a second consultation. So perhaps we'll have a clearer idea of what the county's intention is and how they might use those standards at that point.
Thank you. I've got no other speakers, so we are required to, prompt discussion, which we've had, and note formally, I think. So, all agreed? Agreed, yes? Okay, that's, thank you, Catherine. We're now on to item 11, which is Alistair Day, please. It's the extension to the Garrison Conservation Area. Evening, Alistair.
Good evening, Chairman. This report concerns the extension of the Garrison Conservation Area. It was subject to a committee report back in December 2020, where members were asked to endorse going out to public consultation. We've been out to public consultation, and that consultation was combined with a consultation exercise on the Roman Circus Management Plan and the development brief for the Abbrow site. We have not received any objections to the proposed conservation area extension, and so I'm seeking members' approval to formally proceed with the designation of the extension. I would just point out there's a typo in paragraph 2.1. It should be Appendix B shows the extension to the conservation area. Appendix A shows the existing Garrison conservation area. Thank you.
Councillor Young.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd really like to commend the work of Alistair Day on this proposal. There is an awful lot of interest in the Roman circus, and the early discussions we've had with the Ministry of Defence about this site and the work that's been done in collaboration with the Colchester Archaeological Trust is really solid work, and it gives us the framework to move forward productively when that site comes forward in terms of development. The inclusion of the additional area in a conservation area really gives us the opportunity to create something very special going forward when we are able to access that site, which is currently covered by the Abbrow buildings that are still there. But it gives us a little bit of the jigsaw that fits over the footprint of the Roman circus and gives us the opportunity to grab back a bit of that land in terms of marking out the footprint of the Roman circus, which we know is of significant value historically and to Colchester and beyond. So, you know, it's been a fantastic piece of work. It's been out to public consultation. That's gone very well. And I'd very much want to endorse accepting this, Chair.
Yeah, I thoroughly agree with you, and I can tell you that the new portfolio holder is very keen to also. Any other speakers on it? If not, very speedily, it's a case of, yes, sorry, I missed you, Andrea, sorry.
That's fine. Obviously, also in support, but what would have been really helpful is on the maps where you've got the existing, if you put the red section in the bit with the blue section, because I don't know this area at all, and I've just spent about 10 minutes trying to put the jigsaw together, and once I've done it, it's so obvious, but that just would have helped anyone who's unfamiliar with the site. Otherwise, it's a great report.
Jan, can I move over to you for the vote, please?
Do you want to take the vote with a show of hands, or do you want a named vote? Show of hands in favour. Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alistair. Obviously, you're staying in the chair because you've got the next one too, haven't you? Which is the Roman Circus Management Plan. And we have Sir Bob who wishes to speak. So would you like to present first as you're already in the chair, and then we'll bring, yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, this rates a similar sort of site. Back in December 2020, the portfolio holder approved a public consultation exercise on the Roman Circus Management Plan that was produced by Jess Tipper, who's now moved on to Historic England. The purpose of the plan is to provide a strategic framework for the interpretation and management of the Roman Circus over the next 5 years. The public consultation exercise attracted a number of comments. All of them, I have to say, are supportive of the concept of the master plan. A number of the representations highlighted particular issues, things like signage to the site from the town centre and interpretation around the circus itself. Those objectives form part of the management plan. A number of the representations fell outside the remit of the management plan. For example, they noted that Southway was a barrier between the town centre and the site. As I say, that falls outside the remit of the management plan. I've summarised the various representations in the back of the report and offered the officer comment, and I've come here to seek your approval to adopt the management plan so we can take it forward.
Thank you, Alistair. Can I ask if you would vacate the seat for Sir Bob, please? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman. You've certainly got a lot of meaty items on the agenda this evening, and I'm very pleased with this one and the previous item that Mr. Day introduced, and I was delighted the unanimous endorsement and your generous words at the beginning. I'm not sure if you've actually formally minuted appreciation to the officers of the planning department for these two reports, but perhaps I could suggest that if I didn't quite pick it up, but I thought it was well made, because these are two exceptionally good reports. We seem to forget it's nearly 17 years since the Roman Circus was discovered by Philip Crummy, whose knowledge of Roman culture is greater than anybody else, I should think, ever. And Mr. Day starts off this one. The Roman Circus Management Plan provides an overarching strategy for the management of Courses Roman Circus, a nationally significant heritage asset which has the potential to become an important cultural attraction. And I asked myself the question, I put the question out, if this Roman Circus had been discovered in Chester or York, would we be talking 17 years later about doing something about it? So better late than never. So the extension of the conservation area is vital, because with the government relaxing planning laws, this is a brownfield site with two dirty grey skyscraper office blocks, which could well have been used as justification for similar on the site, of which there'll always be REMI workshops, but is now ABRO or whatever. So I do welcome this, but I think we need to be very careful in paragraph 10.1. The provision of the Roman Circus Management Plan will increase developer certainty and will become a material consideration in the determination of a planning application. So the council is still facing the prospect of a speculative developer coming forward with a scheme which doesn't necessarily get the backing of a government planning inspector on appeal. And we know government planning inspectors on appeal are not always sensible in their conclusions. And the way to solve that, Chairman, I would suggest, is for this committee to suggest to corporate Colchester Borough Council as can happen, where a piece of land owned by one public body is offered for sale and taken over by another public body. So here we have an opportunity for the Ministry of Defence and Colchester Borough Council to negotiate the sale of the Abro site to Colchester Borough Council so that it can be in charge 100%, because at the moment, the approach to the Roman Circus is through the Butt Road car park. That would never happen in York or Chester. I'm confident of that. The Goldsmith Street development in Norwich by Norwich City Council, which in 2019 won the National Architectural Award for a new development, a council development, is the sort of yardstick I would suggest we need there. The management plan for the Roman Circus is excellent. And going back to the earlier item, when a community liaison group has been established in which local individuals come together to discuss the garden community, I've also already suggested that be done at Middlewick. I'm going to suggest exactly the same thing happens here, so that the Roman Circus and the Abro site and the people who could be on that would be representatives from the Colchester Archaeological Trust, Colchester Civic Society, the ward councillors, so that a scheme comes out of this, which is led by the borough council as landowner, as well as the ones making the decision. We have the prospect here of developing something which would be a match for anything that Chester or York could produce. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Bob. I was listening to that and thinking to myself, I think there's a certain portfolio holder who does like to get the old Roman, I call it a skirt, but I'm sure there's a proper name for it, out. And I think with our other heritage assets in town, maybe we could do that as a collective heritage one. But I will ask the portfolio holder whether he or not he'll succeed to that. Councillor Young.
Yeah, I mean, I think the proposal that Sir Bob has made to the committee this evening is a really good idea. I mean, one of the things that we know is that despite its historical significance, it has failed to attract the visitor numbers that we would want it to attract. And I think that's because visitors these days really want a very high spec experience when they visit a site. And the facility that is there at the moment, you couldn't argue is of high spec. So certainly in my days as portfolio holder, I wanted to see such, you know, an improved and modern facility to enable a digital experience, for example, for people to really understand what it might have been like to do chariot racing at that site, because I think that really would attract visitors to come and see, because at the moment there's very little actually to see there. So I'd be very happy to propose an approach that Sir Bob has actually set out, and such a group is set up to look at whether this site could be acquired by the borough and shaped as a development plan going forward. The borough council developed this site.
Might I suggest that we actually go wider than that and we ask the portfolio holder to set one up to look at our heritage assets all together, about how we might take Colchester forward, encouraging people to come and witness and see what we have to offer.
Chair, if I may, I think it's about this particular site and the opportunity that it affords at this moment in time. It's not an opportunity we will ever get again.
Councillor Barber next.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really good suggestion from Sir Bob. I think certainly owning key historical assets naturally gives us more control, and I think it's worth exploring as much as possible. And it's good you've come to the committee and said how that idea, because otherwise we would have discussed the report and nodded it through sort of and said that was a great piece of work, but you've added a important aspect to the discussion. I think certainly I personally would support raising this as an idea to the portfolio holder to explore. And also just generally, I think it's a good idea. It might be something the portfolio holders already started doing, but I agree that I think it's worthwhile situations like this, ensuring that we don't have comments such as, having to worry about appeals for all of our assets. I think it's a good point really, and probably an audit well overdue going forward. So yeah, I think that's a good idea.
If I may, we've got a recommendation to adopt the Roman Circus Management Plan as planning guidance document, but we could also add, sorry, I haven't finished yet, but we could also add in the proposal that's been seconded about a group being set up to look at the heritage of. Now, did you want to add to that? Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I welcome Sir Bob's proposal as well this evening. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and we've already heard representations about Middlewick tonight, which is another piece of MOD land, of course, and the challenge, particularly with the direction of travel in terms of national planning policy, is to make development even easier. And so, the paper tonight, both on the Roman Circus Management Plan and the extension of the conservation area, are welcome in terms of what we can do to help to protect our heritage assets in Colchester. So I would welcome an approach to the portfolio holder. I don't know, it might already be on a plan somewhere. It might be a numbered point on a plan somewhere for the new administration to purchase this site. And I think it's probably the third or fourth time I've heard of an audit of assets in the borough in the last 24 hours. So I'd welcome a group that looked at that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I just want to add my thanks to Alistair as well for a really great report. And I'll hand over to Jan to deal with the vote, please. So
Chair, could we be clear what we're voting on?
Yeah,
here,
I'm just
please?
about, yeah. So we're actually to adopt the Roman Circus Management Plan as a planning guidance document, and also to look to set up a group, and your words are, which I'd like you to restate.
Chair, I do think we need to be very clear about this.
Okay.
So the recommendation that's come from Sir Bob is that the borough acquire this site from another public body, which is the MOD, and develops the site itself. That's a very specific request. And if the committee are happy to support that proposal, I think that needs to be quantified. Setting up a group to look at our historic assets is a forum to discuss our historical assets. I think it's quite different from actually acquiring a site that's currently in the ownership of a public body, being the MOD. So it is a very specific ask.
I think we could put a proposal to Cabinet and to pursue the idea of purchasing, but we don't know what the price is and we don't know whether the money's available. So it's very difficult for us to tie up money at this stage that we don't know either side of it. Councillor Barber?
Sorry, Chair, I was going to say I fully agree with the principle. I'm just not sure what powers we have to direct anyone to actually acquire anything, or we're discussing the local plan. I think we need to be careful not to extend beyond our remit. But I certainly think there's merit in, I don't know, writing to the portfolio holder or suggesting to the portfolio holder that Councillor Young's suggestion gets taken forward, and that was the view of the local plan committee. So I don't know, it could go on the agenda of the next.
It's actually Sir Bob's, but
oh,
yeah.
sorry.
The
Sorry,
portfolio
Sir Bob,
holder
yeah,
explores the prospect of purchasing.
Yeah, I just don't want us
That's
to
the
be
wording.
beyond our authority.
That doesn't commit him to anything, does it? It doesn't commit us to anything, sorry.
I don't know whether I agree that, you know, we cannot tie the hands of the Cabinet, but we as a local plan committee can recommend that Cabinet purchase this piece of land. And I think that is what is being asked of us.
I'm not sure we actually can though, because we're a planning body. I mean, we're not in land ownership. We discuss planning policies rather than land ownership, which is distinct. Because I could go put a planning application in on your property.
I'd be worried about that because we're talking about a sum of money we don't know what it is and whether or not we'd be able to afford it. So we could be placing ourselves in real financial straits. Councillor Coleman.
Can I suggest we keep it simple? We vote on the two for Alistair this evening, and the proposal from Sir Bob, Julie, whoever, that goes to the policy panel committee.
Can't we just express our wish as a secondary motion that Cabinet consider acquiring the, I mean, we can't tie in Cabinet, we're a planning body, quasi-judicial planning body, so.
That wording's acceptable to me. So what we're going to do is we're going to vote on Alistair's to adopt the Roman Circus Management Plan as planning guidance document, and also your words, Lewis.
Well, I think it's primarily Councillor Young's words, but I think it was along the lines of the local plan committee expressed a wish that Cabinet investigate acquiring the site in that this item agenda refers to.
Yeah.
Whatever. Is that okay with Councillor Young? And I'll second it because Councillor Young did make the original suggestion rather than propose.
Got the wording, isn't that okay? Yes. Okay.
So we're going with the proposal in the report, and that the committee express the wish to Cabinet, they wish to explore the purchase or acquisition of the Abro Summit. Okay, do you want to do a show of hands? Yeah, thank you. Unanimous, Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Jan, very much indeed. That is it, I believe. Thank you, Alistair, very much indeed. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight, and see you next time.